Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
Your co-host, Rich Gear, here as well. And Doug, I'm going to play it easy tonight, hopefully, because you got the main story tonight, right? We're going to talk about your adventures down, what was it, North Carolina, or where'd you go?
Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay.
This is the Creation Summit is an organization that we're sort of affiliated with, and they put on a conference here at Michigan State University a few years ago.
When was that? 3-4 years ago? How
3 or 4 years
Yeah.
ago. I forget what date it actually was, but we had one of the speakers here that was at this particular conference, and it was at North Carolina State. So I got a chance to visit another campus, and it was interesting because they were actually, the day we arrived, they were playing Duke in inter-city rivalry, because there's actually 4 universities right there in the same area: North Carolina, North Carolina State, Wake Forest, and Duke. And
Duke,
Yeah, and I guess they were playing Wake Forest. They weren't playing Duke, but anyway, that doesn't matter. And so we had 3 speakers. Dr. John Sanford was one of the speakers, and he was the guy that was here at Michigan State University. We also had D. Russell Humphreys.
Oh yeah,
and he's the cosmologist, space scientist, and
famous for his book Starlight in Time.
You're right.
In the white hole cosmology, which we've talked about from time to time on this show, but and everyone else has talked about it as well. But there was another one you took.
Well, there's a third fellow who was the main speaker, and his name was Peter Borger, and Peter is from Germany, and he was born in the Netherlands. And so I actually had opportunity to interview him first in my hotel room, and we did a regular RAE TV show, which is now up on RAE.org.
Part of the official lexicon now, huh? What part of Germany is he from? I was just curious.
Well, he's just across the border from Switzerland.
So on the other side, because my daughter-in-law is from Sarlat, Saint Louis, which is more on the French-German border. So it's on the other side. So he'd be on the west eastern. West. I get it confused. Probably
but anyway,
it doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. But Peter's written a book called Darwin Revisited.
Okay.
And so we talked about his book on the TV show, which if you go to RAE.org, you can go and watch it. It was a pretty interesting interview that we had with him. He's a molecular biologist.
So when your interview with him, Doug, what was your takeaway? What would you like the audience to know about? Is there 1 or 2 or 3 points that really kind of was interesting or confirmed something?
Well, the biggest thing was that there was an experiment that they were doing, and I guess this is fairly commonplace, where they have mice that they use to genetically modify, and they will take away genes to see what they do.
Okay.
And so if they hit upon a gene that is that they remove, it should show up in the phenotype. In other words, there's some sort of a characteristic that may not work anymore.
Really?
And what he found out is that he kept doing this on all these mice, and he couldn't get them to show any difference when he removed these genes. And so he did hundreds of these experiments, and the mice were as viable as their brothers and sisters. And so what he's concluding is that the genome has so much redundancy in it.
I wonder. Okay.
That you have and it's an entire entity in and of itself, so that there's a whole network of things go on. So that there's backup upon backup upon backup upon backup of all these different systems that go on in the genetics.
Interesting. Wow.
And they're still trying to figure out a lot of the different things that they're seeing in the genome. Now,
how do you take a gene out of something? When they're in their embryonic stage, or how do you do that? I'm just curious.
Well, I'm not familiar with the process
that's
at all,
that's
because
bizarre. I wonder how you do
that's
that.
something that's happened much later than what I had training. You know?
Okay.
And so,
Yeah, it's
I had the
beyond,
foundations of the biochemistry, but back in the 1970, that was still fairly primitive.
You're back in
compared
the
to
Triassic
today,
era, man.
And so, but
quote an
the
evolution.
principles that I learned back then are still the same. You know, you can't manufacture the stuff of life just out of physics and chemistry. And so, and he confirmed a lot of the things that I remembered from my old chemistry days, that this is something that is commonly known amongst microbiologists, is that you can't create life in the test tube.
Is he responding to what potential, I don't know, what people would, let's say Darwinists or evolutionists would say, that this means like, well, just these are all the mistakes that were made before they got it right or something?
Yeah, he's finding that everything's functional.
Okay.
And so,
but even when you take one that functions away, something will still function. It'll still function as a backup
it's
system.
not only functional, but it's functional in a redundant way.
Okay.
And so, if you crash your automobile, it'll still run.
Oh yeah.
That's that type of thing. And so, but the other thing is, Dr. Sanford has shown for a number of years now that the genome is dying. It's accumulating at the rate of about 300 mutations every generation.
Wow.
So it's
I've heard that.
It's a thing where you have certain things that function in the generations before that no longer function. And so the question is, how do you account for it? And so it's a really big problem, and he says, if you're not a Christian, this is bad news. You're expecting that there's a mechanism to produce all this information, and you're not really, it's not showing up in
You're not
data.
finding it, yeah.
And the other thing I found very fascinating with these two microbiologists is that they're finding some unique things. They've found a triple-stranded DNA, and so so it's and it only exists for a little while, but it's apparently performing a certain function, maybe during reproduction or something like that. And they're trying to figure it out, what this is actually doing. But there's actually room within the DNA molecule for a third strand. And so he's trying to figure out, well, how is this actually all working? Now, it then occurred to me, well, maybe what he was observing was the messenger RNA being pulled out, but...
Did you mention that?
And I didn't, but that thought came to me, but it would seem obvious to me that he would know that would be the case if that was indeed the case. But apparently this triple-stranded DNA exists for a little while, and they haven't actually determined what the function of it is.
Okay.
So it's
exciting stuff, man. On
exciting stuff.
Molecular biological level. That's pretty wild.
And so the other thing that was amazing with both of these fellows is that they're getting to the point where they're able to detect that there's actually a spiritual dimension to the genome that we can't really. Well, we can detect. Apparently, they can detect this, the spiritual dimension.
What are they detecting? I mean,
well, it's sort of like there is a way that it behaves up to a certain point. Now, like for example, if something dies, you have all that genetic information still there.
Yeah.
But it's no longer running. There's something that's not sparking it, keeping it going.
Okay.
And so there is something that actually leaves at death that is a spiritual dimension that holds it all together. Now they're actually starting to measure this and to figure out what it's doing.
Quantify spirit. I just remember years and years ago, and I don't even know if it's true. It just I heard these stories out of a lot of different sources, and I don't know. I never really backed it up. But people would actually weigh corpses or weigh them, and then upon death they would lose a little bit of weight. Now, whether that was just material or was that the spirit leaving the body, I remember hearing that years ago, and I thought that's pretty intriguing. They could actually quantify something that's non-physical, And I've kind of not really done any research any of that in recent years. I haven't heard much about it, so I figured it was just one of those odd things. But now you're telling me something. It kind of reminds me of that in a different way.
Yeah, it woke up that little perspective that I've thought about for years. But really, to me, it seems obvious. The Bible tells us about it. The body, soul, and spirit. Yeah, right. And we can't really measure soul and spirit, but now there's something they can measure, or at least apparently quantify it in some fashion. That's fascinating. Well, it's something like you can see the effects of it. Okay. It's sort of like you're seeing the shadow of it, or. It's kind of like you look in here, you see something in the corner of your eye, and you look and you can't see it. Right, yeah. Oh, right. I see, yeah. Those are tantalizing. Those are interesting. So that's the two microbiologists. Right, that's, who are the guys' names again? Peter Borger and John Sanford. Oh, Sanford, yeah, okay. And then you also interviewed Humphreys? Russ Humphreys. Yep. Now, I didn't get a chance to actually do a face-to-face interview with him, but I got his presentation on planetary magnetic fields. That's always fascinating to me. Which is awesome. If you ever remember this, back in 1984, Russ Humphreys made a prediction. He stuck his neck out. He did. Based upon his little wild theory that in the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, what he did with all the different, with the earth and the planets, and he took a scripture out of 1 Peter that talked, I think it was 3:5, that talked about in the beginning God formed the earth out of water. Out of water, for water, or something like that. Out of the water and in the water. In the water, yes. Yep. And so so what he did was he said, well, this would be a convenient way for God to give a planet a magnetic field, because all he could do is have all the protons spinning in the same direction, which would be the hydrogen atoms. And so if they're spinning in the same direction, that gives it a magnetic field. Okay. And then when each of these atoms get sort of knocked around a little bit, the magnetic field will sort of continue to sustain itself. Right. But there will be, over a period of time, these magnetic fields will decay. Right. And so he made a calculation that the original, based upon the weight of the Earth and he figured that it was a planet Uranus. He made a prediction. Was it Uranus? Uranus and Neptune. And Neptune, and that was, and his guesstimates or estimates were like the field would be 1,000 times stronger than the standard evolutionary scenarios based on great ages of the universe. So, well, let me continue to explain. So I'm just curious. I just want to make sure I'm on the right track on that. So. All right. And so what he did was he estimated the magnetic field of the Earth at the time of creation to be a certain number of Gauss, and then he then took the rate of decay and extrapolated down to what it is presently today, which is about a half a Gauss. I think it was like 8 Gauss in the beginning. And now we're down to a half? Down to 1/2 of a Gauss. And so, based upon what has been measured over the past 100 years, because the magnetic field has been measured for that long. And so that decay rate is something that's known. And so, based upon that, he went out and made a prediction that he thought that the different planets could also fit that idea. And then the measure of Jupiter was known at the time, and Saturn, but they didn't know the magnetic field of...
So why were they so high? I'm just curious, if they knew Jupiter and Saturn already, they already would have had to modify their estimates of gravitational field, not gravitational, but magnetic fields. And why were they so off in Neptune and Uranus?
They have their own, the evolutionists have their own theory called the dynamo theory.
Well, I was going to get to that. I wondered if you were going to get to that. Yeah, that's because they think that the Earth should have, it went down and then back up and down, but there's no evidence for that, Doug.
There really isn't. And the more that time goes on and they get these measurements from the various planets, it's, the dynamo theory just gets blown all the water.
It's not dynamic.
But every one of Humphreys' predictions for the planets have turned out to be correct. Now, what they also found, besides Uranus and Neptune, was that Mercury had a small magnetic field.
Okay.
And he then measured that, and it fit his prediction for Mercury. And that was quite a number of years ago when the first probe went over there. Then there's a recent probe that has flown by Mercury and measured the magnetic field again, and it has actually dropped in its strength.
Yeah, okay.
And the rate of the drop fits Humphreys' model.
Decay rate, okay.
And of course, it being a rocky planet, they didn't expect it to be have any magnetic field at all. But
this is not anything about it. What is a magnetic field? What is the implications if we lose our whole magnetic field? We went from 8 to half. We're kind of down to the nubs here,
Right, we are. And Humphreys and the evolutionists don't even worry about that, because other than some animals who use it for navigation,
right?
There's really no big effect.
There's no effect. Okay, all right.
Yeah,
I'm just curious about that. And for freedom of or full disclosure, years ago I confused the gravity and magnetic field. They're not the same thing. Okay, I got that totally mixed up. And then I got Humphreys off on a whole nother tangent. Remember we talking about? He goes, "Oh, that's an interesting thought," and I didn't even know what he was talking about. He went off in this whole thing, and I just totally conflated the two things. I got really confused on it. Because they're sort of like magnetic and gravity and all that kind of stuff seems similar to me, but and they're not anything related at all. But
I suppose if you lived in a strong magnetic field, maybe you'd be a little bit more attractive.
Oh, why is that? Oh, you're more attractive. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, well,
But
of course, we might sag more, though.
But and here's kind of my connection with this is he started talking about on CRSNet, which is the Creation Research Society email list. We got to talking about these magnetic fields, and I asked, and at that time there was a probe going to the moons of Jupiter, and I asked him, what about these things? Do they fit your model? And it turns out that they also fit his model, and some asteroids, and his model doesn't expect Mars to have much of a magnetic field, but it does show where there is actually magnetic field reversals on Mars in the crustal rocks.
And what does he say about that?
Well, he says that that fits his model because back in the past, within the observable past, which is within historical records.
You talk about maybe during the time of the flood, our flood?
Yeah, right.
There would have been something that affected Mars?
Mars and maybe Venus also.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's possible evidence that Venus had its entire globe resurfaced at one point in time.
Really?
So anyway, it's a fascinating expectation. One might think that Dr. Humphreys would get the Nobel Prize
You think?
for
science?
this prediction that he made that was right on with this sort of thing. But
I have no respect for the Nobel Prize right now. I have so little respect for it based on what they did, what with Dr. Damadian and knocked him out of it, and creationists just by and large will just totally get ignored.
Right.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that Dr. Sanford told us, is that his particular thing was where he was asked if he was getting any attacks from evolutionists. And he says, no, not really, except for two bloggers, atheist bloggers on the internet, but and they really don't have anything of substance. And population geneticists acknowledge, what he's talking about.
We're in trouble.
Is really showing the data of what he's predicting. But what he is getting is being shunned. He tries to call up some of his colleagues to ask them questions about certain things, and they won't answer them.
Really?
Boy. So it's sort of now he's a little bit isolated because of the things that he's put in print and published.
It's just so sad because, these people, they claim to be not purveyors of truth and searchers for truth, and they're anything but, because they've got their blinders on. But, and Doug, I've had a saying in the past, it's to be ignorant is not a shame, but willful ignorance is. Mm-hmm. In other words, when you willfully put yourself in the dark and others by your own unwillingness to open your eyes to what's really... This is one thing I have to admit, even though she was an evolutionist, this is a total sidebar, but in a sense, but it's the one who discovered the soft tissue in T-Rex bones. Mm-hmm. What was her name? The gal. But she's an evolutionist.
Yeah.
But she was honest, and she knew the creationists were going to have a field day with it, and we have. And now we found collagen and hemoglobin and DNA and everything else, but no one was even looking for it before. But she was honest as an evolutionist, and then she tried to explain it away. That's fine, but these guys shunning Dr. Sanford is just, that's unconscionable. That is just basically pure out and out. It's bias in its ugly form. Mm-hmm. All of us are biased to some extent. We know that, but do not go.
We need to go where the data leads us.
Yeah, you do. I mean, we are confident because we believe that the word of truth, the biblical text, is accurate when it touches on physical and science and history. It's not a science textbook. It's not a history book, but it touches history, it touches science, and it's accurate when it does touch those subjects. And so we're confident in that. But if the people say, well, how could you falsify your biblical thing? We could give them several things that could falsify it. But the reality is, it is a faith thing. Mm-hmm. But we submit that evolution is a faith thing, and this idea that they're doing right now just shows how much of a faith it really is, Doug. Mm-hmm. That they would shun him for that and these were colleagues he probably has worked with in the past, probably, right?
Yeah. Now I want to talk about two other people that I spent some time with.
Two others. Who else were they?
Helmut Welke, who's the guy from now head of Creation Summit, and he also has a organization called Quad Cities Creation Science Association.
What's the Quad Cities?
Bettendorf, Iowa, Davenport, Moline, and another one, Rock Island, I think.
So they're all in Iowa.
They're they're on the Mississippi River, and they're
two of the towns you mentioned were in Iowa.
Two of them in Iowa, two in Illinois. So, so he came to. He was in Chicago for the weekend, and then came and picked me up and took me to Raleigh.
Oh, yeah.
And so he was a very interesting thing. He had a talk on the radioisotope dating and the age of the Earth, which is a subject for another show.
Okay.
And we've talked about it a number of times, so we really don't have to rehash it. But he's
really involved in that then.
Yeah, he and Dr. Humphreys really were on the same page in a lot of different things.
Okay.
The last guy I want to talk about, his name is Dan Reynolds. and he's the head of the Triangle Association of Creation Science, and which is the triangle is the research triangle in North Carolina.
Oh, really? Okay.
And so they have an organization there, and they were one of the sponsors. And I had a good chance to talk with him and catch up with him and inform, tell him about what we were doing, because he drove me back and forth to various events.
Okay.
And so it was,
so what's his big thing then? Does he have a big thing that he?
he's a biochemist.
Okay, that's what I wanted to get
And
at.
so
Okay.
we compared notes, and I told him about my experience in qualitative analysis, where I threw away the stuff I was trying to make and kept the water. And I was wondering why I was boiling at 100 degrees. And he says, "Oh yeah, that's a common rookie mistake."
Really? I don't even know what he's actually talking about, so I can't even make the rookie
I was
mistake.
making cyclohexene and in the laboratory, and it separates into two little layers. And so one of them is water, and one of them is cyclohexene. Well, my grade was based upon the yield of cyclohexene,
Okay.
and I threw it down the drain.
Oh, no. Oh, boy. Okay.
So that's the sort of little things that can actually change your career a little bit. And it did mine. And I asked myself, what do I really want to spend the rest of my life in a smelly laboratory with all these carcinogens?
Well, okay.
And so it sort of prompted me down that road, and I'm glad that I took the path I did. And God has been good to me. But it's interesting. I've been exploring all sorts of things like that. What event back in my past year actually turned the course of my life? That was one of them.
Yeah, okay.
And so, that was our trip out to Raleigh, North Carolina, at the Origins Summit that we had.
And you got several shows out of this. We taped it right?
Yeah, we taped several shows. There are going to be 7 big hour and a half shows.
Wow. Are you going to be showing them on the channel? Or are they on YouTube or what?
They'll be available on our website.
Okay, great.
We'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.